Now this gentleman has just pulled up across the street from what they'll tell you is a multi-storied 5, 6, 7-story building, brand new for the time, horse and buggy. But if we take a closer look, there's nothing new about these buildings, missing all sorts of windows, and it really doesn't add up to see this mode of transportation and this style of architecture. So let's take a closer look at Rochester, New York. So Rochester, located in northern New York State, up here by Lake Ontario. Part of the Erie Canal. I did do a video on the Erie Canal. You can check the link in the description for that one. And really not much going on in Rochester up until early 1800s. You can even see here, as you go through the timeline on Wikipedia, they had a population of 15 beginning in 1811. And of course, magically, the Erie Canal is constructed, and Rochester becomes a boom town, and that's how they explain the history of Rochester. That may very well be the truth, but on this channel, we like to question history, and we consider alternatives to the story we've been given of the historical narrative. You can see the population demographics here. Rochester, 162,000 at the turn of the century. Modern day, just over 200,000. But let's get to the visuals, shall we? If we take a closer look at some of these early photographs, and from the early 1900s, you can see we're supposed to be looking at a city that's less than 100 years old, or about 100 years old. But so much of the architecture looks almost damaged. You can see here, we're looking into the canal, you can see the bottoms of the buildings going right into the water. All the way along here, you can see the arch. And if we scroll up here, you can see what looks like blistering on the side of the building. So this looking very old and damaged, and not really fitting the timeline that we're given for Rochester. And of course, famous for the falls. I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about the region. I may get some of the pronunciations wrong, some of the specifics wrong. That does happen. So just as in this video, we're going to be focusing in on the area. And reminding me a lot of the Niagara Falls area as well, where you're seeing this type of landscape. And now another look at that canal, and you can see the stonework, the amount of work that would have had to have gone into building all of this on the water itself. This very unique feature here, especially for North America. And I have been wanting to cover Rochester for quite some time, ever since I did my video on the Erie Canal. So much of the brick and stone, what we'll call stone, architecture in beautiful Rochester. A lot of nice visual images passed down to us through time as well. And here you can see it again. Multi-storied downtown buildings. We're looking at the horse and buggy era here. The streetcar in full effect. And I did do a little research on Rochester for you. I discovered that it is famous for Susan B. Anthony having resided there. Now, Susan B. Anthony, if you don't know who that is, famous for playing a pivotal role in the women's rights movement, women's suffrage movement in the 1800s. Apparently illegally voted in the 1872 election, we are told. There she is here. And you can see here again with many of her fellow women's rights activists. Famous American figure, historical American figure. And I would suggest a hero to many women in the modern day. But getting back to the architecture, the horse and buggy era, our multi-storied architecture. Rochester has plenty to offer, old world to offer. Here's the viaduct, looking like the water's quite high at this during this picture. This area again, very famous for all these viaducts and locks along the canals. An early county courthouse, almost vanished from history, this one, difficult to find. And a construction, or is it a repair, photograph of the canal area. Hard to know what to make of it. I really like these streets of Rochester. They really show their age in a lot of these high quality photos. You could see that the track system here has been a part of the infrastructure for a very long time. And again, we're looking at a photograph from early 1900s. And it's only supposed to have been in existence for 20 years at the most for that time period. Here's the old train station. It is interesting to get a look at the people of the time as well. Fully clothed, top hats. It looked like they would be very hot in the sun. And of course you have to have these very ornate and elaborate train stations. It's very, very fancy brickwork going on here. All the telltale signs of what we in this research community called the Old World. We have the old City Hall. The Savings Bank, which is a spectacular looking structure. No longer stands, of course. Very ornate, and again, horse and buggy time period. So the reason we question the narrative has to do with the contradictory evidence that we're seeing with the modes of transportation and the technology that the people of the time were said to have had, and the architecture and what resources and time and ability would have been required to build this type of architecture. And we posit in this community that there is a disconnect between what history is telling us of that time period and what actually went on, and that there's a falsification of our historical timeline, and all of the technologies seeming to have sprung up in a very short period of time is an indication that the timeline has been condensed. This is another good example of technology at the time, steam engines, and the bottom side of a multi-storied structures. So it's very difficult to posit that these were built by these people, as far as I see it. And of course we don't get a lot of visual evidence to suggest otherwise, and I understand that is tied in with the timeline of technology and photography. And while we're on that note, let's talk about Kodak. George Eastman, the founder of Kodak cameras, Rochester being the birthplace of Kodak. Again, an important historical figure in the timeline of technological inventions, along with this gentleman here, Mr. Thomas Edison. And what we're starting to unravel, and it's just opinion, is that many of these figures are historical placeholders and really not the inventors of the technologies, but the names who have been attached to the invention of the technology that was previously available or revamped from an older technology. And of course this is all speculation, and it's a very difficult process to question things that we have come to believe to be true. It's not an easy process for anyone, so I salute and applaud anyone that is willing to question the narrative, the storyline that they have been given about who they are, where we are, when we are. And I think we are uncovering many inconsistencies. And we're seeing too much architecture. We're seeing too much evidence of a cataclysm that seems to have been obscured from our vision. And as you look at this type of stonework and the permanence of the structures here, how it all really blends in with the landscape, you really do have to question the timeline that we're given. As we peer into the banks of the falls, we can see the archways and the windows built into the embankment there, blurring the lines between natural and man-made. And that's why we ask the questions. And I welcome you to join me on this journey of discovery, to open up that third eye of perception and consider all possibilities. A wonderful armory here. So many of the armories built in the castle style, what we would consider to be a traditional castle look. And again, you're seeing how the buildings and the landscape all seem to be blended into one. And Rochester is a great example of this phenomenon. We also notice in this community how the signage on the buildings seem to be secondary to the architecture, as if the architecture was there and the businesses and services that moved in, we were just inheriting the structures that were already there. Here we have the Beach Park Bathhouse, and this is a great example of what gets done to many of these old world structures. You can see the cupolas on top here in a postcard form, and then you can see how the cupolas have been removed. So the decoration has been dulled down, I suppose you could say. And you see this in multiple variations, especially with churches, and you see it often with courthouses and government buildings. In this case, a public bathhouse. So much of this grand architecture that really, they call it Victorian architecture, and you could get right into the narrative on Victorian going back to the era of Queen Victoria, the victory of the New World over the Old World, which is what some have suggested, and I think it's a fitting description. And the carving up of the Old World by New World inheritors during the Victorian era. Offering so much in the way of our architecture built right into the landscape. Here we're looking at a flood from supposedly 1865 Rochester. The population looks to be about 50,000, but you still have these multi-storied structures even in the postcard all the way down this main street. And you can see how high the water is, so there's definitely another story down below there. So again, I think it's healthy to be skeptical. I think blindly trusting the historical narrative that we have been given. I don't think it benefits us in any way. I think we have been shown where not to place our trust. I've been shown quite clearly where not to place our trust. I encourage those of you that are in these fields of study to explore these options. I know it's not an easy task to question your profession, but I think the truth deserves, the truth needs to see the light of the day. And I think we all need to get behind uncovering the truth of who we are and where we are and what's really going on here. Because we know we have some collective problems that we really need to take care of. And I think we can do that by coming together and setting aside our petty differences. Differences I would suggest that have been placed before us by these inheritors, these shadowy behind-the-scenes figures. And I think we need to realize that there's so much more to the story here and so much more to who we are. And you can see it in the architecture. So many of these cathedral-style structures, castle-style structures, across North America. In this video, of course, Rochester. But really it doesn't matter where you look. You're going to find architecture that very well could have been standing for a good 500 years. If I told you that this structure here is somewhere in England, in the English countryside, and it was built in 1610, you wouldn't have any problem believing me. But this is the entrance to the cemetery, Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester, New York. And all of these will have a shelf life of not much more than 150 years, if that. One thing about the fountains as well. The fountains seem to have played a part with the energetics of the old world. Potentially some form of cooling system that needed to be a part of the energetics, the way that energy flowed through the structures and infrastructure. And I think a lot of the fountains were removed by the inheritors and replaced by monuments, usually with a statue on top or an homage to a war, something along those lines. Still part of the cemetery here, all of this. So I do think that was a part of the capturing of the realm. And I'm not saying that everybody who existed, even these gentlemen here, were in the know, as they say. But I think that the structure that was set up, that hierarchical structure, pyramidal structure, if you will, that was set up to obscure the truth and to allow for this transformation of our society. And here we're looking at a little bit of evidence from Bluff State Park. And you can see here, 90 degree, we're looking at the remains of a cataclysm. A lot of my meltology research has pointed me in this direction, that we are looking at a blend of intact structures from the old world and much of it that has turned into what we call natural, but really is just destroyed beyond recognition by human hand, let's say. Of course, no shortage of churches, all sorts of denominations, subdivided denominations, again, that structure, that web that they would have laid over society. Each denomination getting its own castle church, but all ultimately answering to the same power structure. No shortage. And of course, many of these are only attainable in a postcard form, but it is a marvel that we are able to see them at all in this day and age, this information age. The battle to control information is on. The very platform you find this video is a major battleground in this information and disinformation battle. Forces seeking to control the flow of information. There's a panic level. We're reaching a panic level with some of these forces, I would suggest. But all we're really doing is questioning what we're being told, and not blindly trusting or wholeheartedly believing what we've been told. We're questioning the narrative. and the magnificent architecture. That would be very difficult to achieve even in our modern day. Of course, on the linear timeline that they have us on, really not making any sense as to how these structures were manufactured. Now look at the quality of the building materials, with the stone and the stained glass and the marbles, the terracottas, and the ornate woodwork, gilded woodwork. And again, it's very difficult to fit into that short time frame in that narrow box. Here we have the Eastman Kodak building, said to have been built late 20s, early 30s, in that Art Deco time period. You see so many of those structures going up in that time period. We don't see them, but they're said to have gone up. This is the Eastman Theater. You see the interior of that. Again, you have these very ornate, very vast. So you have to try to picture the false work that would have gone into finishing off the ceiling in such a manner. The amount of scaffolding you would have needed to finish that. Try to picture that today. Any of you in the construction trades, you'd probably be using some sort of man lift, a basket lift of some sort, to try and get up there and to try and finish off the ceiling in the manner that the client desires. And it gets very difficult to wrap your head around accomplishing those goals. And Rochester apparently did have a subway for a period of time. Interesting part of the narrative. Apparently not a lot of people are aware of that. Also look at the size of the streets, the distance between the buildings. The streets are made for this type of transportation. You can see that it's just big enough for the two lines and a little bit of space on either side. And the buildings are made in such a way to accommodate that. So all of this is a part of the infrastructure of the old world. And it's just something that was inherited. I thought this was interesting as well. On top of the pole here, you have this circular structure. Kind of unique looking. They sure did love their towers. I suspect there was some sort of peak on here at one point. The Free Academy, you can see, still stands today. Very sturdy, very permanent looking structure. Looking even more so than the back here, looking like the 60s, maybe 70s actually, this photo. Very permanent looking structure. And they say as so many of these degrade after 50 years and have to be torn down. I mean, you really got to question the narrative, folks. Are we going to believe that? The amusement company. The Genesee Amusement Company. There's your lion's heads. The Granite Building. There's a better look at it. And then another wonderful contradiction for you. You can see the very frail looking horse and buggy and the very permanent looking multi-storied structure with sidewalks and curbs looking like they've been there for quite some time. Those hard working horses. Another nice panorama look at the falls, and you can see, is that natural? Is that remnants of an entryway? And then what can we even say about the windows in the embankment here? I sure would love to know, and if there's any locals watching, do you know any more about the structure here? Can you actually go down in this area here? It looks like windows. You can see here part of a wall window. It gets a little grainy as I get closer. We come over here. Also another arch looking like a doorway. So not sure what to make of that. If I was in the area, I would probably be doing what I can to explore that area through the lens of what we call meltology. And post-cataclysm remains, I think, is what we're looking at. Some hospital work going on here. The domes, of course, you have to have a dome. or a tower on your hospital. Nothing was done haphazardly. Everything seemed to have purpose and beauty and was well crafted. Interesting photo here. It's looking out of place. You can see there's some snipping and clipping going on here. Again, the hotel powers, same area. Large structure, early time period. And again, a little look at the interior. You can see the marble columns. Wonderful looking seating area. You can see a circular seating area centrally located. Very interesting. Very well thought out. More so than what we see in the modern day. Again, the marble columns, coffered ceilings. That was the Powers Hotel. This is the Hotel Rochester. We've seen it a few times already. Another large structure for an early time period. The Sagamore Hotel. The Savoy. They like their mansard roofs here in Rochester, it seems. Another nice street scene. We have the automobile starting to emerge now, but we still have the horse and buggy overlapping, and you still have the streetcars. And the awnings over the windows, an interesting phenomenon too. Is there some sort of resistance to sunlight? Interesting way of keeping the sunlight out. The Hotel Seneca. Again, very ornate looking. I know it gets a bit grainy too, but you can see the pattern work here. Everything's so very well thought out. Looking like we've got faces, probably lions. Hard to make it out though. Very detailed along the top here. The Hotel Seneca. There it is again, and we see the arcade next to it. And what then maybe we'll call an expansion. Interesting. And I do enjoy the street scenes. A little taste of life in the early 1900s. The Kodak Park Works, so it must be the Kodak factory area in Rochester. Again, those embankments, right, are very difficult to determine what's man-made and what's natural. We'll zoom a little closer to get a good look at that. This is a great example right here. Not exactly sure what's going on here. Definitely looking like some sort of cataclysm, some sort of damage has occurred here. And massive stonework. The Maplewood Park Memorial Bridge. And I think this sums it up nicely for us. This is the Maplewood Park seat of forgetting and remembering. Now, what do you think the intention behind this is? Forgetting and remembering. Have we forgotten? Are we remembering? What do we have to remember? What was it actually once like? Who were these structures built for? Was this really built for a gentleman's club? Or was it inherited? This is the Odenbach coffee shop. Nothing done haphazardly. You can see even in this photograph the shine off the marble columns here. Try to think about milling up a marble column in the 1800s. And of course you'll say, well, they had steam power. It was easy to do. Do you understand how many marble columns were needed for so many of these structures at that time period? The old post office, federal building. Alright, one of my favorites, the Powers building. And a fantastic photograph. We're going to take a closer look at this structure. And we do see the telltale signs of the first floor being below grade or street level, as if it was designed that way. Very interesting, and you can see the very ornate detail on the structure. We've gone up several stories, and now we begin to have a mansard style roof where the roofline tapers back, and we have a second level of mansard style roof, and we have what looks like to be another floor on top of those, and of course the tower is needed as well. And this amazing structure still stands. Here's a look at it in the modern day. This might be a better one, actually. Let's take a closer look. Double roof, another story. Incredible and very unique looking structure. I was actually quite surprised to find this was still standing. And of course being used for some sort of healthcare now. And we are seeing what looked like, I'm not sure, I thought they were lion's heads, but maybe not. I mean, this could be something else. What do you think those are? Not sure. Not sure what to make of it. Those are some very, very large columns. You can see the height of the person down here. First National Bank. So many of these schools and seminaries and convents and academies, and so many of these structures going up. Difficult to account for the timelines on many of them. There's a better look at that door I mentioned earlier. This is looking like it has been certainly made by the hands of man, and now they'll tell you this was an old cave and they put a man door in there. They formed up some concrete and they poured it. It may well be the case, but something about this narrative does not sit well with me. And I think there's a cataclysm that is being obscured from our perception, from our consciousness, and we're living in a time of remembering, and we're grasping at the truth, hungry for the truth. Another train station, New York Central Station. And there's that old one again. New York Central Railroad Station from the other side. Must be the same structure. There it is there. Yes, it is. Just a nice look at from the Kodak Tower. And you can see again well established looking Rochester. And there's a nice look at the stonework involved with the canal infrastructure. And the schools had to look like cathedrals, and they had to have their bell towers. There it is again. And then, of course, they'll say that all the immigrants that were flooding into these towns, and it really doesn't matter what city or town I look at, it seems to be a very similar narrative. It's like these countries were emptying out into the States, if you follow the narrative. But then when you look at these countries, you also notice that they're building the same structures at the same time period. So I wonder if they inverted the timeline, and that America is much older civilization than we're being told. Now this ties in with the World's Fairs and the setting of the narrative, and the question of the native North Americans being here in the way that we are told is a sensitive topic, to be sure. I really don't want to offend anybody, but I do think we need to question the narrative. We know that there was an elimination process going on. We know that they were changing the languages, and they were falsifying the storyline. So with that in mind, how much of the storyline has been falsified? These are questions that do need to be asked, and yes, I do realize they are uncomfortable questions. And this, of course, is what happens to so many of the old structures. This is a Times Square building. Interesting looking structure, built in less than a year. Again, 1929, 1930. Looks like 11 months to build this structure. Very interesting top on that one. Unique. Worth including for sure. Of course, part of the university, this is just how you build universities. Nothing to be surprised about with the architecture at any university. It's just how they build them. There's the owls watching over us. University campus, you can see it all there with the columns and the dome style structures and old world infrastructure having been inherited, I think. And I don't know in what fashion, what form that took, if it was completely an infiltration, if it was an overhaul, an invasion and an infiltration, a combination of the two, and if it was over many generations to solidify the narrative. Are we still in the process of them altering history to the point that favors the narrative they want to maintain their control over us? I suspect that's the case. Hence this information battle we find ourselves in. But really, if you peel all that away and not get too serious about it, you can really enjoy the architecture. And that's enough. That's enough to make you feel, I think, hopeful that there's something more, something better that we've been told, something better that we've known our whole lives. And then it becomes exciting. We start to feel like we're an Indiana Jones character. We can unearth these discoveries and share them. We have these platforms to share them with each other. Share our discoveries and hear what you have to say. So please do let me know what you have to say about this research and what you think. This has been Rochester, New York. Thank you for joining me.